We're gonna start a series this morning called Journey Through James, and it's a 5-week series. Why is it a 5-week series? Because there's 5 chapters in the book of James. Yes. Years ago, about 2010, we had a very well-known person here at our church named Ted Haggard. And Ted Haggard was the spiritual advisor to George Bush Jr., and a few others, and pastored New Life Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He was the president of the National Evangelical Association. And he ended up making some poor choices and ended up going through a bit of a scandal. And on the upward swing of that, when he was getting back on his feet again, seeking counseling, all of that stuff, he started just sharing his story. And so we brought him into our church. And Ted and I have remained good friends to this day. He still leads a church out there, but he started a new church out there quite a few years, over a decade ago, called St. James Church. And I remember sitting in the car, I'm like, so why St. James? I said, you were affiliated with the Assemblies of God, and you're, so the whole St. James thing, it feels more, and this is no put down, it feels more Catholic, when you have a St. James or, like St. Mary Magdalene and stuff. He goes, because I truly believe the book of James is a blueprint for the church. And it really is when you think about it. I've heard since that day, I've heard it said many times that it's a blueprint for how a church functions. And so we're going to hang out in chapter 1 today and focus on the testing of our faith. This chapter provides valuable insights into testing our faith and how we can endure it. And we're going to come at it from the viewpoint of us individually and us as a church. Given today, we're going to talk about church business. And so I want to break it down by chapter in 4 different points that James, who is the half-brother of Jesus, offers practical wisdom and encouragement to early Christians facing various challenges. The thing about all of the authors of the Bible is that they don't just write it never experiencing it. They write it from a viewpoint of they're either going through it, David, okay, or they've experienced it at one time and they're sharing their story about it, and they're writing insights about it. And so there's multiple points that can be brought out just from chapter 1. And I would suggest that if you want to prep yourself for this series, go home and read the book of James. It's a fantastic read. I know, Thomas, you said you're working through it and it's very insightful and gives us good direction. The first point, okay, which is contrary to a lot of things in our world today, is joy in trials. All right, the joy in trials. Verse 2 begins with a strong command, okay, and it says this: consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Okay, that is contrary to how the world operates. When we face trials of many kind, the last thing a lot of people, even Christians, will say is, I'm going to consider this pure joy. Okay, pure joy for me is cheat day when I can go get a little bit of sugar, okay, off of this carnivore diet. I love the carnivore diet. It's good, like shrimp, steak, beef, turkey, chicken, whatever, but it gets old eating eggs, all right? And so, that's something I would consider pure joy. Considering a pure joy is when you can make it through a day and no problems arise. That's pure joy. But when you wrap your car around a telephone pole, or things go south with something at home mechanically or whatever, something goes bad at the job, the last thing we in the human nature would say is, I'm considering this pure joy. But he expounds on this. James challenges us to view trials not as burdens to be despised, but as opportunities for growth and character development. I've shared my story with you before when God defined my call into ministry, surviving a house explosion. And I got to say, and I don't say this boastfully, it was just a moment of crisis where I literally said, instead of getting all uptight and mad or nervous or whatever, I remember just stating in my prayer, God, what are you teaching me here? Okay, let me just slow down, because it was so big. We've all had those deals in life where they were so big, so out of our realm of how we can even cope with this, that my only prayer was, God, what are you teaching me? What are you trying to tell me through this? Because this is something that just came out of left field. How can we possibly find joy in trials? How could anybody, given today's situation, stand up at a church in Israel right now and say, consider it pure joy, my brothers? Okay. Even though Iran is shooting off missiles like a stormtrooper would use his gun in Star Wars, okay, and missing every single shot just about, it was as news across the board said, it's a failed attempt, okay, but a threat nonetheless. How can you stand there? Tracy and I were saying last night, how could we sit in our home and listen to some of these people that were being interviewed saying, oh yeah, but we know we're good, we know we're safe and all this stuff. And us in the US, we start hearing missiles are raining down on cities. I know I need to consider pure joy when I'm facing trials, but right now, oh my goodness, the panic sits in really quick. And that's the worldview we need to have with this, even in the book of James, is saying, we can do this. How do they do that? And what can we learn from that in these situations? It's because these trials produce endurance. They produce the fortitude to move forward. When we train and we learn and we go into discipleship, when we study the word, we're gaining endurance, we're making endurance, we're learning that when that rough patch hits in our life, we're going to be able to make it through. One story that I'm following very closely as a boxing fan. Do you know what story I'm following very closely when I say I'm a boxing fan? Mike Tyson. All right. I used to, in Milwaukee, I got every boxing pay-per-view. And when there weren't pay-per-views, I watched HBO Boxing After Dark. My man, the guy I always enjoyed watching was Vladimir Klitschko. He's a doctor from Russia, but they called him the Iron Hammer. It was like, yes, that's just amazing. One punch, you're gone. All right. And it's just fun to listen to a boxer come in introduced as Dr. Vladimir Klitschko. It just sounds like something out of a dark movie, But the reason why I'm really enthralled in this is not so much that Tyson and Jake Paul are going to fight and all that, but the endurance that even a guy that's pushing 60 years old is going through to know this is what's going to happen. This fight's been officially sanctioned by the Boxing Federation. So that means it's not a cheap little exhibition match. Jake Paul's going to get destroyed. All right? I'm just putting it out there. That's what I'm believing. But here's a guy that could have just said, I'm coasting through this. I don't even want to do it. I'm 60. What does the Dynamite Kid have to prove in all of this stuff? But he's training, and you're seeing the videos, and you're seeing him go more and more and more into this mode. And what that's telling me is that he's building up his endurance for the fight. Here's what's interesting. Iron Mike Tyson, the guy who ticked off so many people back in the 80s with pay-per-views, because pay-per-views typically are $50 to $60. All right, to watch this. He would knock the guy out in 40 seconds. And you're like, really? At least go 3 rounds. Okay. That sort of thing. Play with them a little bit before you annihilate them. It's always fun with boxing too. The guy who wins, like Evander Holyfield, ordained minister, George Foreman, ordained minister, knocks the guy out and they get up to Mike. I just want to thank the Lord for giving me the strength. It's like, yeah, for what? Destroying the dude? I kind of find humor in that. But in all of this, Mike Tyson is going for and building up his endurance for the fight ahead. And he's had some real conversations along the way. Mike Tyson, of all people, in an interview said, I'm scared to death to face Jake Paul. Okay. But he said, as I get closer to the fight, that's going to fade away. That's scary right there if you're Jake Paul. As he gets closer to the fight, he knows that scariness is going to get away. Look at that in the realm of discipleship. The more we know who God is and how he works through our trials and the endurance we build up, going through something can scare the tar out of us. I don't want to face this day. For me, most recently, I did not want to face the day when I started losing parents. But I was building up my endurance. I knew who I was in Christ. I know that my parents passing away is not going to affect my salvation at all. And never once will I turn to Jesus, to God in prayer and say, why did you allow this to happen? Why did this sort of thing take place? Never once, because my studying, the teaching I had in Sunday school all the way up culminated to this point saying, sin entered the world. All men are appointed to die at one point. And we know that disease happens, all of these things. It's age, all of this stuff. Am I happy about it? Absolutely not. Am I sure in my faith about it and still trust God? Absolutely. That's because we build up endurance through our trials instead of saying, I'm just going to pull away. I'm going to go hide my head in the sand. I'm not going to show up for a little while. No, train, discipleship, get to know who God is. And James here is saying, consider pure joy because your endurance is going to build up and you'll know where you're going. There's wisdom from God, from James in James 1-4. Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. By going through the trials, these things will develop and we learn from them and we learn not to do it again, or we learn how to cope with these sort of things. My mom's passing was horrendous. I struggled so hard with that. But it prepared me for when my dad leaves. And it prepared me to be, as society would say today, no matter what age you are, a 49-year-old orphan. No longer having parents, but saying, now I'm moving forward. You're going through this. So and my second point is wisdom from God. In James chapter 1, 5-8 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all who all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. James directs our attention to the importance of seeking God for wisdom. You're buying a car. You're becoming a parent for the first time. You're making a big decision with your job. When is the last time we stopped and said, God, I need wisdom. I need to hear from you on this. I need to move forward in this knowing that this is what you have for me. Sometimes he speaks to us in a still small voice. Sometimes he gives us peace about a situation. And sometimes he gives us an uneasiness about a situation. God's not the author of confusion. If what you're about to do causes a whole lot of confusion, makes you unsettled, you can't sleep at night, guess what? It's probably not of God. Hold out for what God has for you, because then you'll have peace that surpasses all understanding and moving forward. Does it mean it's going to be easy? And you might be like, I don't know about this. Maybe. Okay. Jonah did. Read the book of Jonah. But you know that it's of God and you're moving forward doing that. God desires to guide us through difficult situations and provide us with wisdom to make right decisions. However, James also warns us against doubting, as it is a sign of an unstable heart. When we seek God's wisdom, we must trust in his guidance, knowing that he will direct our paths. And it goes into point number 3, that there will be trials and temptations. In James chapter 1, 12-15, it says, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. This starts from little kid up. I remember the very first candy bar I ever stole. It was from Irv's grocery store on 55th and North Avenue. I wanted a chunky bar in the worst way. And my parents were not one of those parents that'd be like, okay, here you go. I was like, nope, not this week. Things were tight, I don't even know what a chunky bar would have cost back then. Those were those square chunks of chocolate. It's so good. So I pocketed one and I went out and stood in the garage. I'm going to go play, Mom. Meanwhile, I go in. I'm 6 years old, 5 years old, whatever it was. And I come back in and she's like, oh, what'd you have to eat? Nothing. It's like Noah eating Cocoa Pebbles in the morning, just chocolate everywhere, And I got caught. But then it also goes all the way up through your teen years. Don't be tempted. Don't give in to temptation. Why? Because this is the weekend. If we didn't notice already, that is, if you just look around a little bit, it's full of hormones in the air. It's prom weekend in Wapaka. Okay. It's, you go to Spencer Lake Bridal Bible Camp. Okay. You go to, that was a joke, by the way. Spencer, that was an old joke from even going to Spencer Lake as a teen. We called it Spencer Lake Bridal Camp because, well, I'm going to seek Jesus. She's cute. You know, that sort of thing. And it was like, oh yeah, you're going to seek Jesus. All right. You know, lousy teen. Okay. And it was there's a lot of things, but when we give way to our desires and the pleasures of our flesh, it leads to sin. Sin leads to death. Okay. And in a lot of cases, this could mean a spiritual death. You're withering, you're falling apart. This can fall true for adulthood as well. The whole hormone thing doesn't just apply to youth groups. It applies to adults as well. My goodness. You know, the relationships that you can see in Wapaka, you know, here, there, and everywhere and stuff. It's like, but it goes beyond that, just relationships. It means any desire of the flesh that we have, that we give into, it can cause a lot of unsettledness in our life. James is saying, be careful. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, you've made it through. Integrity, holiness. Who are you when you're by yourself? Who are you when you're by the computer all by yourself? What are you doing with that computer when you're all by yourself? Holiness, integrity, saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to make these poor decisions. And standing the test. Is it easy? It isn't. In a lot of cases, it's not easy. But we do the right thing and you become stronger as a result of it. And James distinguishes between trials and temptations in this passage. He says trials come from external circumstances and can test our faith, while temptations arise from within and lure us towards sin. The thing about trials are they're not inherently evil, but they can become pathways for temptation if we give into that sinful nature. And James reminds us that enduring trials and resisting temptation leads to receiving the crown of life promised by God. So we need to stand steadfast in our trials and temptations. All of us have our trials and temptations. All of us know our weaknesses. All of us know what we should not put ourselves into a certain situation because we know we might struggle with it. I've shared this story before, but it's worth sharing again. Years ago in Milwaukee, I brought in a well-known Christian rock band. Surprise, isn't it? And the lead singer, who was considered the pioneer, the godfather of this movement in this genre, was sitting in our living room, and he goes, so Bob, Tracy, what do you struggle with? Tracy and I were just married. She comes from little Nakusa and all that and stuff. And, we were kind of lighthearted, and he goes, wow, I just stepped into Mayberry here. Like everything's perfect here and stuff. And I said, so what do you struggle with? And he pointed out the passage. He goes, these are the things we should talk about and we should know about ourselves, because scripture says we should boast of our weaknesses. Why? Because you're aware of it then. You know what you are capable of, but by God's power, you're not going to do it. And this guy came out of such a life of hippie era and all of this stuff. He goes, my weakness is this. I wasn't ready. I've never been in this transparent of a Christian conversation before. Sad to say when you're 29 years old, 28 years old. But in a church, sometimes we wear facades and we're not truly open with one another. And so he just got right down to it. He goes, I promise you, if I put myself in a situation where someone drew a line of Coke in front of me, I'd snort it. This is the lead singer of a well-known Christian rock band. And at first, I was like, really? Wow, get it together, man. I didn't say that. But after that weekend, I'm like, I admire the tar out of that guy. I really do. He knows, he's well in tune with what he should not put himself into, and he will battle it to not get himself into that situation. And as I was putting this together, I was thinking, never done illicit drugs, never drank, never done any of that stuff. But at the same time, if you put a large concrete mixer in front of me, baby, that thing's gone. All right. And I am on a diet and I'm doing great. But you know what? Someone says, hey, Pastor Bob, I bought you a large. You want to test that theory? Stop over today with one. No, don't. I'm joking. But it's one of those things like, I get it. Okay. So now I'm fighting this trial, this temptation. I'm going to fight through it and I'm not going to do it. And the victory is on the other side of that. I'm that much stronger to face it when that should arise again. And so is point number 4. There's hearing and doing. James 1:19 through 21 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. James is teaching us about the importance of listening and being slow to speak, slow to anger, quick to hear. And we must strive for righteous conduct, living accordance with God's word. Because, again, it builds up the endurance in us. It builds up who we are. James urges us to be doers of the word, not merely hearers. And he adds this in James 1:22 through 27. It was a lot of words, so I didn't put it up on the screen. Do not merely listen to the word. This is the preached word, other words you hear reading it. Do not be merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceives themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Bottom line, keeping the main thing. All right. And that's following God, going hard after him, leaning into him, getting to know who he is. There comes a point where we are no longer babes in Christ. We become mature in Christ. So we know the basics of Christianity, but now we move on into the more in-depth areas of Christianity and knowing who God is. And then we are able to stand firm in the trials and storms that we face. And James lays out a great blueprint in this passage to do these things. This chapter, again, it reminds us that we are reminded that our faith will inevitably face trials, difficulties, and temptations. However, these challenges can be the means through which our faith is refined, strengthened, and deepened. This trickles over into the church. We face trials of many kind. We face trials in many areas. We have a lot of victories. We want to do the right thing. And as Radiant Fellowship, we make it a point, we always want to hear from God on what we're doing. It's so easy to get tied up in a lot of other things. But at the same time, I've been down that road before. We've been down that road before. We've done a lot of different goofy things that luckily the zoning commission was way different back when we got started here. But we did things where it was Triple X Church was a ministry back then. It was a ministry to help overcome a porn addiction. And we got partnered with them and we did one of their campaigns, and they were very clickbaity. Do you know what that means, clickbait? It means a very catchy title on Facebook or whatever, just to get you to click on it, okay? And so we did a lot of clickbaity things in order to draw the people's attention, even though that message was just about overcoming an addiction to pornography through the curriculum of Triple X Church. So the theme of that Sunday was it was a national movement. It was called National Porn Sunday. All right. So you can see that's clickbaity. Okay. That's very like, okay, what's that about? And the theme was confronting the elephant in the pew. And when a church signed on to do it, they sent you a 40-foot blue elephant that you could inflate and put in your yard. Well, we did one better. We put it on top of the church. All right. So when people are driving by, they're seeing this blue elephant on top of a church that said National Porn Sunday. All right. And there, people were interested, but it was so cool to see what God did with that and how the message challenged people. They heard from the founder, Craig Gross, and all that. One season we talked about that would have ticked off the zoning commission as well. It was called Toxic Church, and finding your way out of toxic church, how to move yourself out of that and get into a true relationship with God. Heather, you remember that. What we did is we cut out 4x8 sheets of plywood to look like Nickelodeon slime, painted it green, and hung it on the entire fascia of the church. So there was like 4-foot slime coming off the front of the church. There were biohazard barrels in our front yard and everything. A big thing that said toxic church, and it got people talking, all of that sort of stuff. So some things you hear from God on, some things you don't. And, when a church starts going through struggles and everything, you're like, okay, we're going to hold fast. We're going to hold fast to what we're going through, because some things work great, other things didn't. And here we are today. Radiant Fellowship still standing. A church that started with 8 people and a mortgage. All right. In 2005. It actually started earlier. I was not the original pastor here. I was the youth pastor when I moved up here, when Tracy and I moved here. And after a terrible storm in ministry here, the Assembly of God District Office appointed me as the lead pastor of this church. And I remember as plain as day, the speaker, the person that introduced me, didn't care for me a whole lot at the time. And he walked in through that door on a Sunday morning with 8 people and everything, walked in the door and he goes, want to let you know the Assembly of God has decided to appoint Bob Adams as your pastor. And he walked right back out the door again. It was like, wow, that's how we start. I'm used to churches like having a big banquet and all that. So Tracy and I ended up going out to dinner after church, and I submitted the receipt for a reimbursement. I'm like, there we go. I'm celebrating me today. You got to do that sometimes. All right.